Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We thank Him, we praise Him, we glorify Him. Beseech Him to send His choicest salutations upon His most beloved sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, and upon all those who choose to tread in His path until the last day. The first time I met somebody from this part of the world, a Rohingya woman, was in 2012. In 2012, the world was a lot different than how we see it right now. May Allah grant ease to all those who find themselves in a place of difficulty and ailment in this pandemic. And it was in Ramadan, and like many of you all, our Islamic Center at NYU, very robust Ramadan program, and in the nights we were praying, and one night I heard somebody crying very heavily. But the tears they were crying didn't sound like tears that are catalyzed by spiritual motivation, hearing the Quran recited in that way. And so when we concluded prayer, I went to see who was crying in this way. And I met this woman, this Rohingya woman. And I asked her, "Are you okay?" And she said, "In my community back home, there were 12 people who had memorized the Quran." She said when the Rakhine army, the Buddhist mobs came to her village, they set fire to everything. She said they killed those hufad as well. And she said, "These tears that I'm crying are because I have not heard the Quran recited like this in so long." And that was in 2012. In 2012, I had no real understanding of what was going on in this part of the world. And I went and did some cursory research and found not too much was being written about it and people weren't speaking. There was a man who used to work for the New York Times by the name of Nicholas Kristof, who had written an article in 2012 equating what was happening then in Myanmar to modern day concentration camps. And now a decade later, we're still in a place where the world does not understand the narrative of our Rohingya brothers and sisters. May Allah grant them ease and make us a means through which that ease is brought to them. I've met Rohingya in Malaysia. I've met Rohingya in Mecca. There's 1,400 Rohingya refugees in Chicago right now that nobody's doing anything for. And I went to Bangladesh twice, to the camps that our brothers and sisters in BASMAH have set up these amazing services to help people simply live and to live with healing. Now I'm going to show you some images, and I'd like for you to focus on them as we go through it, and to understand that when we talk in terms of statistics and when we talk in terms of numbers, these are actual names of people, individuals who have lives that are going through things that may Allah protect us from ever having to see something like this ourselves. As was mentioned, 60 to 80% of the refugees that are there are women and children. There wasn't one that I met in the 2 times that I visited that couldn't tell me that they hadn't seen loved ones burned alive in front of their eyes. Who couldn't tell me that their entire belongings, their homes, every single thing that they owned, taken away from them. This man was the first Rohingya refugee I met. His name is Nur Alam. He's surrounded by his grandchildren. Nur Alam told me that he had made the decision to walk for 3 days straight without stopping to the refugee camps in Bangladesh. And in his decision, he said, we were going to celebrate Eid al-Adha in our home before leaving. And he said on the day of Eid, The Rakhine army and the Buddhist mobs, they came to his house. They set fire to his home, burned alive all of his livestock. They killed his brother Muhammad Ali and other members of his family in front of him. And then he took his grandchildren and remaining relatives, and they just started to move and didn't stop for 3 days straight. That's how he spent the day of Eid. And so when you hear a statistic that says 14,000 pounds of udhiyah meat, you can't just think about it as a number, but as a way to bring back a connection to many who the holiday was experienced with trauma, who didn't taste meat for years after that. And when you decide whether you're going to give your udhiyah or not in the coming year, you got to think that there's real people on the other end of it who it means something different when they get it. When I asked this brother, what is it that you are looking for? He said, I just want a safe place for my family to be. Oh, can we go back to the slides? Yeah. This was a young girl that we met when we were filming media one of the days in the onset as the government was building infrastructure. There's no security or guardrails. She's a little kid. And I was positioned on top of a cliff that had a 30, 40 foot steep drop. And the edge of the cliff was as sharp as the edge of this podium, going straight to the ground. This young girl started to run around the edge of that cliff. And all of us jumped to grab her so she wouldn't fall 20, 30, 40 feet. Probably would pass as a result. When we got her to a safe place, I turned and looked in different places to say, where are her parents? Who's looking after her? But she, like many children, doesn't have parents. But you have to understand, as an orphan of genocide, it's not simply that her mother and father were taken from her, but there's not a living soul in the world that knows that this young woman exists. Nobody could tell us her name, how old she actually was. Nobody knew how it was that she actually came into the camp. It's a different kind of aloneness. But she's not alone because we now know that she actually exists. In every hadith, in every verse, and everything that is uttered on this mic, you got to think about whether it is something that you actually uphold as truth. Not just lip service that gets spit out and goes into an ear and out the other, but let it soak into your heart. Tonight you can't be here with guilt and remorse. You have to be here with real mahabbah, real love. So that your presence here is not about satisfying a nafs that's going to tell you to give in a way that helps to make yourself feel better. You have to be present with love that our hadith tells us is conditional for the completion of our faith. A love that is there for our brothers and sisters in such a way that we love for them what we love for ourselves. And there's young people like this that need for us to think about them. This young man, if you look at his left hand, there's some scar tissue that's coming. You can see there was a wound there. He's young, probably in his 20s. When he fled, he said that the soldiers continued to shoot after him. And they struck him in his hand with a bullet. But because there was no medical care or facilities on way, you can't just stop and tell the people that are persecuting and oppressing you, hold on, you got me, I got to take care of this bullet in my hand. He still runs, he still moves, and what he ended up doing was taking the bullet out by himself, extracting it with God knows what. And then he gets to a camp that has nothing in it. Imagine now that's happening to somebody who's as old as your grandparents, or somebody who's as young as the child that we saw on the slide before. One of the days that we were there, there was 1,100 children that came into the camps by themselves. No adults, no parents, 1,100 children on their own, unaccompanied. The sense of resilience, mashallah, the yaqeen, not one turned away from God. You know, it was remarkable in every camp that we went to, people who literally had nothing. The most pristine facility in every camp that they were building by their hands was a place that they would go to pray. And the little money that they had at that time when the border first opened, they would pool together to make sure that there was a caretaker of the masjid. And they're doing that after seeing and living and experiencing ethnic cleansing. That's the type of person you're being asked to help today, not because they're helpless. If you look at the water that's here on the ground, this part of Bangladesh gets impacted very heavily by storms and rain. And when you're in a refugee camp, it's not built with just infrastructure and sewage systems and these kinds of things. And so when the water falls, it builds up. This woman's name is Asiya Khatun. You can't tell in this picture, but Asiya Khatun is almost about 9 months pregnant. Asiya Khatun walked with her child and her husband, 9 months pregnant, for 7 days, she said, without stopping, as soldiers chased her down. When she got to this place and she settles in, she's taking water now out of a hole that's in front of her tent. And this is water that from the storms, all kinds of things collect in these holes. You have animals that bathe in this. You have garbage that flows into it. You have latrine systems that were made for hundreds, used by thousands, that the sewage from it mixes into it. And I said to this pregnant lady, "What are you doing with this water?" She said, "We're going to wash our clothes. I'm going to clean my house." And then really quickly she said, "And we're going to drink it." I said, "Why would you drink this?" She said, "We have nothing else to drink." And this is not about guilt. Push shaitan to the side. Each one of us, subhanAllah, has a cup in front of us that we don't even have to ask. Somebody's going to come and fill it for us when it's done. And she said, "I don't want to think about what it's doing to my family. My daughter, who's a little kid, she's already so sick from it. Let alone what it's doing to the baby that's in my womb." When I saw this brother, I didn't think it was possible to actually see hunger in this way. And you can look at him and think, what must he look like in person? A literal skeleton with skin on it. This doesn't happen because you live in a refugee camp. This happens because of what is taking place that causes you to come to the camp. And you gotta think about it. Allah has blessed you, man. My grandfathers were both 6'4", tall Kashmiri Punjabi men. My grandmothers were both 5'2". You know what side of the gene pool I fell on. And I went to go visit the home my father grew up in. After partition, they moved to a place called Gwal Mandi in Lahore. My dad lived in a 2-room house that was probably twice the size of this stage. Then he showed me a street lamp that my grandfather, after he rode a bike to a bank where he was a teller, would come and make my father and my uncle study to be doctors. Not because he was particularly keen on medicine, but he knew under colonization and the existence of supremacy that the way his children would not have to be subservient to whiteness was that they become doctors and not have to answer to anybody else who made them think that they could only be accepted when they became that which they were not meant to be. And I'm going to tell you that my grandfather and likely his grandfather and generations after and whatever, not one of them would likely imagine that years later in Dallas, Texas, you could go down a street and it would be littered with masjids and all kinds of halal restaurants and 200 people sitting in a banquet hall like this. So when you see somebody that's like this, you have to be able to understand the miraculous nature of this religion and what it is that God is calling us to actually fulfill. Because there's a lot of people who went through a lot so that we could be where we are right now. There's a lot of people that we are connected to. And in our collective history of colonization, imperialism, and slavery, our ancestors would not imagine that we would be where we are today in terms of what it is that we have access to, networks, credentials, resources. So you got to do something with it. Islam isn't about just ritual as an ends, but a means. And being Muslim means to have a mission of some kind. And today there are men and women who are fulfilling a mission rooted in our faith that are asking us to be a part of something so that nobody has to go through this. This woman's name is Dulu. She's 78 years old in this picture. When I met Dulu, she told me about how the Rakhine army came to her home. They killed her husband, some of her children, and she had to walk for 5 days with her remaining relatives to these camps. When I asked Dulu, what is it that you want? She said, I want justice. And the people who were with us, they said, tell them that we can't give them justice. We're here to just provide food and other items. And she said, then I just want peace. I want safety for my children, my grandchildren. I want you to think, man, she's 78 years old. She likely comes from a culture where she got married very young. Even if she got married when she was 28, that means in front of her eyes, they took the life of her life partner of 5 decades. This is the potential nature of humanity. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We created man in the most beautiful of forms. The Quran interjects a paradox of us as humans, because the next verse says, ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. And then we let them fall to the lowest of the low. That paradoxically within us is capacity to be both agents of beauty and agents of ugliness. So you want to ask yourself, what do you want to be, and can you dare to live your luminosity? The people that came before us that allow for us to sit where we sit, they didn't struggle so that we could just sit and do nothing. But they built for us so much so that we could continue to build and continue to do. I'm going to just take 2 more minutes. I don't have my phone. I don't know how long I've been talking. I'm sorry. Strategically speaking now, what our brothers and sisters are doing in Myanmar, in Bangladesh, is building infrastructure. I'm going to give you an example of what I mean. In the Bronx, just some weeks ago, some of you might have heard, there's a terrible fire. May Allah make things easy for the people there. It's not the first fire that ever happened in the Bronx. And these are people whose stories are written about how a space heater was a catalyst of a fire. Not many stories are written about why in the middle of a winter where the temperature is below zero with wind chill, somebody is using a space heater in an apartment in New York City. And they don't have adequate heat. And consequently, there's not accountability. The person who owns that building sits on a board that's a transition committee for the current mayor. The people who live in that building, some are still in shelters, they're displaced, some had to go back into the building where they were traumatized. And I sat with many of those people in the days after, saying that we thought on this day we were going to go and have a sleepover with some of our friends. We were going to go and have a dinner with some of our family members. And now they have to go back into those same places and relive those memories again and again and again. The systems, the structures, they're built so that we don't recognize these things. What happens in the absence of institutions is that it's easier then to mistreat and oppress. And so what's going to happen when our brothers at BASMAH build a medical institution, they build infrastructure, it's harder to then push people back to where they came from, saying you're not our responsibility, because there's more that's there now that's going to be difficult to move. You help people to establish roots, you help them to move forward, but not with a recognition that's in denial of what caused them to get there in the first place. And this is a serious malady that exists within our creation at this time. That the cause of all of this is nothing other than greed, unsatiated desire. When I was there, they said to me, "Are you shocked by any of this?" And I said, "No." On the first day I was there, they said, "You're not allowed to use the word refugee." Because the Myanmar government at that time, they said that if you use it, we won't let you into the country to help the Rohingya that are here. That's what systems do. That's what the politicians that you take pictures with in Ramadan, they do. The second day we were there, they said you can't use Rohingya. Erase entire narratives. And they said, "Are you surprised?" I said, "No, that's what they do to black people in my country." But we as Muslims are meant to do it differently. If you can give $1,000, $50,000, $100,000, give it. I serve a student-based community that after I came from here the first time and went back 10 months later, in 10 months my students raised over $1 million for these people. They're students. MashaAllah, may Allah increase them. I know that a lot of you have a lot more money than my students. And my dua is that Allah puts into your heart the same love that my students have for people that they've never met but know are in need of support from them. That you dig deep tonight and get done what it is that you intended to do. In our theological understanding, before anything came into existence, Allah had written that each one of us would be here in this moment. Why do you think God brought you here today? And when you answer that question, make sure that you fulfill that answer through your actions. And when you leave, make sure you continue to support and continue to do what you can. At the very least, make dua for our brothers and sisters at BASMAH who are fulfilling communal obligation, ensuring that what it is that needs to get done is getting done for those who are waiting for us to step up and do what it is that we have the ability to do. Wallahu ta'ala alam wa billahi tawfiq. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu.